Morning, AP Eco peeps. Good to see you guys again. Glad to get back into the flow of things after testing. So, macro topic 2.1, the circular flow model and GDP. This is a two-part topic because there's a lot in here. GDP is one of the leading economic indicators, and it's one of those, got to know this backwards, forwards, because it's going to be all over the macro course. Okay, so everything starts off at the beginning. What's macroeconomics? So opposed to micro, which is the study of individual markets and firms, this is the entire economy. It's like a big picture type of study. So we're analyzing everyone instead of just one consumer. Instead of one business, we analyze all or study all the businesses. And so why do we do this? Why is it important? Well, because during the Great Depression, that's when this study was developed. And because that was such a catastrophic worldwide event, we needed terms and we needed economic ways to measure and understand how to correct what had gone wrong. And so with the economy in collapse and unemployment at 25%, economists had to come up with a way to describe and then correct such a devastating economic event. So, why was it created? To measure the health of the entire economy and to guide policies and fix economic problems. So we have the circular flow model, as you know, because we've done this, okay? So we have the resource or factor market, and we have the product market, okay? So we did micro, so we know this intimately, right? But this circular flow model, you're never going to have to draw it, but you do need to know what it entails. So you have, if you downloaded the note packet, you have a copy that you can draw on and do this. If you don't, write this down in your notes, okay? So we have businesses and individuals, right? And businesses sell goods and services in the product market, and goods and services are purchased or sold to individuals in the product market. And you see the arrows, the blue arrows moving from businesses to individuals. And where does the money go? The money are the green arrows, right? Makes sense. Individuals spend in the product market, and revenue or profits, or well, I guess revenue is a better term, go to the businesses. Okay, that's that end of it. Then we know, where do the resources come from? Oh, this is really cool too. I like the way he does this. That the demand in the product market comes from individuals and the supply comes from businesses. So that's cool. Make sure you write that down. That is a very nice way to remind yourself of that. Okay, so individuals hold the resources, right? The factors of production: land, labor, capital, entrepreneurial incentives, and so forth. And they go into the resource market to sell those factors of production. And then those factors go into businesses where they put them together to create their products, right? And then what happens here is costs. The cost of businesses are the resources, right? Remember factor costs, right? And then the factor payments are what the income goes to individuals. And in this case, because it's the resource market, right? You see how it's going here. Individuals hold the supply, whereas businesses create the demand. All right. And then, of course, we're going to have the government. Now, the government sort of mucks things up, as I say, but they're also suppliers and consumers of products, and they supply or become a resource for labor sometimes. Okay, so the product market, the government buys products in the product market and it purchases, and so the money goes back into the product market. And then in the resource market, resources go into the government. We have government employees, right? People that, me as a teacher, actually, technically, and I'm a state government employee, okay? And then income comes into the resource market, right? Money goes into the resource market. And then we all take advantage of public goods, right? Parks, roads, the police department, the fire department, and that goes both to businesses and individuals. And then what happens? Well, we pay taxes. That's how that happens, okay? So this is your flow thing. So stop the video, write this down, or put it in your notes, or use the sheet that's attached. So subsidies go to businesses, and then you have, see, I don't like that he put welfare here. I would have preferred transfer payments, but since we don't know what that is, okay, so this would be things like Social Security, unemployment, anything that food stamps would even be included in here. Any of those things that the government pays out in either in cash or supplements would go into the individuals. And so there's your complete circular flow. Okay, so this is what we're talking about here, and this should sound familiar because we've already covered micro. So the private sector is a part of the economy run by individuals and businesses. The public sector is the part of the economy that's controlled by the government. Factor payments are payments for factors of production: rent, wages, interest, profit. And then transfer payments are when the government redistributes the income, welfare, Social Security, unemployment, that type of thing. And then subsidies, we know what that is: government payment to businesses, and they're usually an incentive for them to produce more or sometimes to produce less of something. Okay, so do individuals supply or demand? Well, a trick question, right? So both. They supply in the resource market, but they demand in the product market. Do businesses supply and demand? Again, same thing, right? They do both. So who demands in the product market? Okay, remember that's going to be individuals and the government. Don't forget about the government. We included the government in the model. And who supplies in the product market? Businesses. Okay. Okay, so this is probably one of the most important slides in this whole presentation. What are the economic goals of every country? Economic growth, limit or reduce unemployment, and price stability, which basically means you're going to control inflation. Now, we'll talk about this a little bit, but a little bit of inflation is not a bad thing, because when you have economic growth, you're going to have some inflation. You just don't want it to be out of control, or you don't want it to be more than your economic growth. And so we'll talk about, that's why Unit 2 is so important, because we'll talk about each of these different economic goals. They're also sometimes called economic indicators. So if you hear that term, that would be also what we're talking about here. So how do we measure economic growth? Well, they collect statistics on production, income, and savings, and this is called national income accounting. And so that's one measure. So the most important measure of economic growth is gross domestic product. Okay, this is a super important vocabulary and definition, so know this. GDP, or gross domestic product, is the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a country in 1 year. Okay, you've got to remember that when we're talking about GDP. because you'll get all these things thrown at you that disqualify it from being part of GDP. Okay, dollar value, that means GDP is measured in dollars. So when you see GDP, think dollars, not necessarily percentages. We will talk about percentage of growth, but we won't talk about GDP in percentages. Final goods, GDP only counts new goods and services, not goods and services produced in another year, or not something that is used to create that good or service. And within a country means it's within our borders, okay? So we have a Toyota plant, no, not a Toyota plant, okay, a Coca-Cola plant, okay, in Mexico, and it produces Coca-Cola. That's not going to count. Even though Coke is a U.S. Company, it's not making Coca-Cola, and it's Mexican Coca-Cola is not going to be counted in our GDP. And 1 year, so it only counts for the year that it was produced, not previous years and not following years. So what does GDP tell us? Well, it measures how well we're doing financially, okay? And so it will tell us how much income, right, the country or how many goods they're producing. And so how do you use it? Well, there's a lot of ways we use it. We compare it to previous years, and did we grow the economy? Did we see growth or not? And in some instances, we won't. Compare policy changes. Did the policy of the Trump administration, his tariffs on China, his deregulation of certain industries, did that increase GDP or not? Compared to other countries, are we better or worse than China, Russia, the UK, the European Union? And so, what do you think? Which 15 countries have the highest GDP? Okay, stop the video, think about it, write a couple down, let's see how you do. All right, so no surprise here. China has the leading GDP, followed by the European Union, and closely behind the United States, India, Japan, Germany, Russia, Indonesia, UK, South Korea. And so this is 2017, okay, so it's a few years, dated a few years, but you can see sort of where we are. Be interesting to see, and they're about, I guess maybe 18 months behind the current time when they're calculating this with the CIA fact book, but it'd be interesting to see next year what, if these have shifted any. And then here's more GDP. And some of these you probably never heard of. Tuvalu, Wallace and Futuna, I don't know, Marshall Islands, that's, I have heard of those. Anyway, interesting. Okay, so how does this work? What is the world distribution, the global economy? Well, we can see that the UK, right, this is, and then the United States and China, and look at the rest of the world. You've got Brazil, Australia. It even broke up some of these African countries here. This is like North America, right? This is Europe. This is China. Oh, I mean Asia, rather. Oh, it's broken up by continents. Okay, that's how it's done. Anyway, it's interesting. And then if the United States were countries, what would there be similar? What would their GDPs be similar to? So the France has a GDP almost like California, Brazil like Texas, New York has almost an equal GDP to Canada. It's interesting. If you like some of these states, take a look, see what you see. Some of them are really super interesting. Of course, the larger and the more populous the state, the higher the GDP is going to be, right? Okay, so how do you measure growth from year to year? Okay, guys, you've got to know this. This has got to be in there. All right, this is way, way super important for this unit. So the percent change in GDP is equal to the GDP from year 2 minus the GDP from year 1 over year 1 times 100, which gives you a percentage. Okay, so Mordor's GDP in 2014 was 4,000, okay? And then in 2019, it was 5,000. So this is your year 2. So you're going to take 5,000 minus 4,000 over 4,000. So what was the percentage change in GDP? Okay, again, year 2 is 5,000, so that's going to plug that in here. Year 1 is 4,000, plug that in here and here. Multiply by 100, and that's going to give you your change. So 5,000 minus 4,000 is 1,000 over 4,000. So what is the change? So the change on this one is going to be, oops, sorry about that. Let me get my pen out here. I thought it was going to pop up for us, but it's not. So you've got, here, let me do it. So it's 5,000 minus 4,000 over 4,000. And this gives us 1,000 over 4,000, which is 25%. Now it's a 25% increase, right? That's a positive number. Okay, so let's try this one. Transylvania, GDP was 2,000, and in 2019 it was 2,100. So you take 2,100 minus 2,000 over 2,000. So that's 100 over 2,000. And that's going to give us 5%. So that's 5% growth. This is highly unusual. Even this is highly unusual. Not unheard of, but unusual. Most countries grow GDP by like 2 to 3%, especially large economies. Something catastrophic must have happened to Mordor for them to get a 25% increase in GDP. What's the percentage change in GDP? Was 5%. Okay, total GDP is different than GDP growth. Okay, so let's take a look. This is GDP growth by country, and look at Libya. That's huge, 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 right? Like I said, something catastrophic must have happened here. And this is 2017, so probably this might have been after the dictator was overthrown and they went to a more robust economy, more of a free market, and that's probably is the reason for that growth. Whereas you have these countries experiencing negative growth, Venezuela, you know, they've gone through some some political unrest, and that impacts your GDP. Okay, does GDP accurately measure the standard of living? Well, not really. So the standard of living can be measured in part by how well the economy is doing, but it doesn't consider everything, okay? But it also needs to be adjusted because the size of the nation's population will impact um, their standard of living. Okay, so that brings us to GDP per capita or per person. And so that's GDP divided by the population, and it identifies on average how many products each person makes per year. So it's not how much consumption, but how much production, right? So keep that in mind. Um, okay, so this is an important concept, right? Make sure that you know this. Whoops. Okay, let's not do that. Let's do this. Make sure that you understand uh, this particular um, concept. Really important. GDP per capita is the best measure of a nation's standard of living. Sounds like a test question to me. All right, so what are the top most populous countries? Well, I'm sure you can guess. So we've got India, China, the US. Indonesia might surprise you, and Brazil. Then you could continue to go down the list. Um, then highest GDP per capita. Look at Liechtenstein. I don't know if you know, Liechtenstein's in Europe. It's this tiny little bitty country, but look at that. Sort of makes you want to live in Liechtenstein, right? 139,100. Now, of course, that's per capita. So maybe they have gazillionaires living there and a whole bunch of people living in poverty. I don't know. But I do know that's crazy. Monaco doesn't surprise me. It's always been a wealthy little country. Again, it's tiny, tiny, tiny. Qatar, uh, like in the 2017, 2018, they were in the news for other reasons, but a lot of that has to do with people that have inherited oil wealth, right? And then Luxembourg, Brunei. Okay, so which of the following best illustrates a improvement in a country's standard of living? Okay, so increase in real per capita gross domestic product, an increase in nominal per capita gross domestic product, price stability, a balanced budget, an increase in the consumer price index. Now, some of these we haven't talked about, right? We haven't talked about real and nominal yet, and we'll get to that in the next lesson. And we haven't talked about the consumer price index. So what did we just talk about, right? We talked about real per capita GDP. And so that is going to be your answer. Okay, that concludes the lesson for today. Thanks for watching, and I will see everybody in class. Bye-bye.